Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. Today we're going to examine a film based on ancient Rome, and it's the film The Eagle. Now this film was an interesting film, and I actually suggest you to watch it. It's a good watch. I myself have watched it twice and I have enjoyed the film. So it has an interesting plot and it's actually quite fun to watch. However, as you can see, this video is a historical evaluation. As a matter of fact, it's part of my debunking series. So what am I going to debunk or evaluate about this movie? Well, first of all, The Eagle has some historically accurate things, but it also has some historically inaccurate things as far as Roman history is concerned. So I would like to take this opportunity to point out both historically accurate things and historically inaccurate things. Now, I am aware that this is a movie, so at the end of the day, it's entertainment, but I think it's a good opportunity for us who are interested in history, particularly Roman history, to learn what was actually historically accurate and what was not, because it's not always that evident. So I have chosen some specific clips from the film that I think are rather important because of the things that they show. And so we're going to watch these clips together, and I'll give my commentary. And here we are for a start, the Bracelet. I don't know why, but Hollywood productions are always having Roman legionaries wear leather bracelets. Look at Trajan's column, just to say one. Not even one soldier is wearing a bracelet. And there are many other things, statues, Roman statues all over the place here in Italy, elsewhere in Europe. Never, ever, we find a Roman soldier wearing a leather bracelet. So here is another question. Here we can't really see the Roman soldier's armor because he's wearing a cloak. Will that be historically accurate? Well, actually this is historically accurate, because Roman soldiers who were sent up north in very cold areas would be issued with a cloak, that it would be both their protection from the cold, their waterproof, and the blanket at night.
Our new commander, Marcus Flavius Aquila.
Okay, so here is probably the most evident part, the armors worn by the soldiers. As you can see, they are lorica segmentata, we can see that, but they're made of leather in this film. So is this historically accurate, or is this completely wrong? Well, it's actually the latter. There is no evidence whatsoever for Roman leather armor at all, except for a leather scaled cuisse from Dura Europos, and a few sculptures which perhaps appear to have floppy breastplates, which could be considered to be leather, maybe. So we do have a little bit of evidence of a leather armor of some sort in the Roman world, and probably foreign. There's no evidence whatsoever that lorica segmentata was ever made of leather. Thousands of pieces of segmentata survive from all over Europe. They're always iron with brass fittings, and of course mineralized remains of leather straps. There's only one documentable piece of leather hide armor which dates to 250 AD, and it could have been Persian, not Roman. So all the remains that we have found in Spain, in Corbridge, in Newstead, they are all metal lorica segmentata. Also, if you think about it, my personal objection against a leather lorica segmentata, why would you make it segmented? I mean, if you are deciding to issue leather armor, then you can just make them one piece. Leather bends more than metal, definitely. The reason why you have segmented armor made of metal is because segments allow it for it to slide inside of each other, granting you movement, as if the armor had been one piece and had been tailored to your waist. Because although Romans did have armor made according to their body measurements, the way they did that for thousands of soldiers was to just mass produce many different semicircular bands for the lorica segmentata of various shapes and sizes, and then when the soldier was going to have his own armor made, they would just try quite a few of these, and depending on the body size of the soldier, they would just create a personalized armor. This was a lot easier than just forging one single cuirass for each soldier individually, so having a muscolata for each soldier. But again, don't have the same effect as metal, so I strongly object this idea of leather lorica segmentata that we see sometimes in films like this one.
Let's do it!
Okay, this scene here was a pretty good scene, and I liked it. It was epic, and I loved it how the Romans used the testudo to fight against the Britons, and it makes them look epic and makes them look very well organized, strategically superior. But the only problem I have with this is that it would not be historically accurate, because testudo was used against missile weapons. So if they were receiving a shower of arrows, then it would have made sense to have testudo and then break up testudo as they would fight hand to hand. But using testudo in hand-to-hand combat would not make sense, because the Romans would have much more effective ways to fight. For example, apart from the fact that I don't understand why he uses so many men and he doesn't just go out with his entire force from the fort to fight the Brits. But again, even in this situation, I would have just organized my men in rows as a normal standard Roman tactic. And as we would have to fight against the opponent, they would just put the shields on the ground, use their body weight to sustain the charge, and then start fighting back. And as 1 minute would go by, the centurion, or in this case the general, would just use his whistle to let the first row know that it was time to go back to the last row and have the second row replace them. This was a technique, very effective technique, that the Romans used in order to have always a fresh opponent first rows which were becoming weaker and were losing strength. This would have made a lot more sense from a tactical point of view, and it would have been a lot closer to how the Romans would have fought. A testudo in this situation wouldn't make sense, because when you have people attacking you, well, in this scene you can actually see that the Britons are actually purposely attacking the shields, but from that distance you can bypass the shields. It's not easy, I'm not saying it's easy, but you can, for example, attack the legs, slide the sword inside, and of course it would still be dangerous because it's not easy to fight against a scutum, but you don't really get any advantage from the testudo in hand-to-hand combat.
Bloody helmets.
Kill him! Kill him! Do it now!
Chin strap scar. Only a Roman helmet does that. Romano.
Here is this idea of Roman helmets leaving scars on soldiers because of the lacing system. As far as we understand, Roman helmets did not have any form of lining inside. We know this because we have found on all the helmets that we have found, there was no trace of anything. Not only, of course, the organic material, because that would have deteriorated, but nothing, no pins, nothing that can help us imagine that there will be lining inside helmets. So most likely what the Romans did, they would just wear a sort of cap, probably padded cap, that they would use in order to give protection from the direct contact with the metal of the helmet. There's no sign of this in the film. They just wear the helmets directly. But another thing is that they talk about this idea of laces, the cheek plate lacing actually hurting you, and even to the point of leaving a deep scar for the rest of your life to all soldiers. Now, this is complete nonsense. I do historical reenactment. I wear Roman helmets for hours and days in a row, and I never even had any problem of chafing, any problem of slithering, nothing. So, and again, of course, I use lacing to fasten together the cheek plate. So it's correct that you do it, but no, I don't think it would be historically correct to say that it actually would leave these sort of scars. I don't know where they actually got that one from, but it definitely wasn't the problem for Roman soldiers. Also, because the whole system is not just a lace in between cheek plates getting all the weight of the helmet, but you also use this part here. There's another ring here which connects everything, so it also brings some of the weight back here on the neck.
Marcus Flavius Aquila.
Okay, with the Roman salutation here, the Roman greeting, and this has been considered and has been proven to be a myth, another myth that actually needs to be debunked. There's no proof, no statues, nothing showing Romans doing this. As a matter of fact, most statues of emperors greet the crowds like this. So the arm is bent and the palm is extended, but nothing, no extended arm. Okay, this is not. Most likely this was not what the Romans did. There are other two ways of greeting, of salutation between Romans, particularly within the military. One would be when you greet a high-ranking officer and you would just do this. Okay, so this is what you do. Okay, just hitting your bosom. And then when you would be greeting another soldier of the same level, the same rank as you would just grab each other's arm like this. And this was called the gladiatorial greeting.
Careful.
Gently. Done.
A blind gladiator? Did they just make that up? Well, no, actually that one has some historical basis. It was just something that they would do in Rome. It was a funny moment to have some gladiators fight blindly against other opponents that were trying to poke them. Most of the time it wasn't lethal and they were not using actual swords, just like we see in this representation here. So this is historically accurate, and it would be something that the Romans would do during gladiatorial games, for example, while people were having lunch. Well, this is again a myth that needs to be debunked. Fights to death were not common at all in gladiatorial games. Occasionally they would happen, but most of the times the Romans preferred to keep their well-trained and very expensive gladiators alive, perhaps having bruises, perhaps having wounds, but definitely they would not have fights to death on a daily basis, because that would just empty the cages, and then they would have to start training all over the place people again. Now, this is not historically accurate. Thumbs up, thumbs down, he actually repeats it a lot, and that makes it sound a bit stupid, because Romans did not do this. Roman people, the public, would never ask for the death of a gladiator. This is not a practice that actual Romans did. It's just something that they chose to do in films because of the pathos it creates. We find this also in the film Gladiator. Again, not historically accurate. But the most historically inaccurate thing here is this whole concept of thumbs up, save the life, thumbs down, kill the bloody gladiator. In this case, the slave. This is a myth, big myth, that needs to be debunked, which comes from a painting created by Jean-Léon Gérôme in 1872. At that time, historians weren't really sure how this concept of the thumb was working, so this was just one of the possibilities that they had in mind, but this whole thumb dictating the life or death of the gladiator was actually opposite. Most likely, the thumb up meant a sword towards heaven, meaning a sword being raised, and so that would be the symbol for killing. We do have an overall understanding that possibly sometimes the other four fingers would be facing down instead, meaning the reign of death. But if you wanted to spare the gladiator with what was called the pollex pressus, then the thumb would be put inside the fist, symbolizing the sword going back into the scabbard. So in this training part of this fort, we see soldiers training, and we see that we have soldiers stabbing, but we also have soldiers slashing. Well, that makes sense from Roman training. Wasn't the gladius used only to stab? Well, actually, the Romans did train, as we can see, hitting poles or sticks, and they did train slashing as much as stabbing, although it was not something that they would use in a tight formation. It was still something that was part of Roman training. Of course, they wouldn't use slashing during a tight formation because of the possibility of accidentally hitting the soldier next to you in line, and in that case they would only use stabbing, but they were training constantly how to use a sword, both for slashes and for stabs, because a gladius is perfectly capable of both. And if there was a situation where they would have to open up the formation, then they could use those attacks too. In this scene here, we see that the remains of the 9th Legion are only skeletons. But would that make sense, considering that only one generation had passed, since we're talking about the protagonist's father who had fought there? Well, from this point of view, we do have to look at a scientific answer. When someone's heart stops pumping blood around their body, the tissues and cells are deprived of oxygen and rapidly begin to die. But different cells die at different rates. Brain cells die within 3 to 7 minutes, while skin cells can take a lot 24 hours after death, they might still be growing normally. Contrary to folklore, however, that doesn't mean the hair and nails continue to grow after death. That is just an appearance of that because of the shrinkage of the skin. Now, decomposition in the air is twice as fast as when the body is underwater and 4 times as fast as underground. Corpses are preserved longer when buried deeper, as long as the ground isn't waterlogged.
No Roman can survive north of the wall alone. You can't.
Then I'll take Eska. I can use his knowledge. He speaks the language.
Eska?
Why not?
It's good to bring the slave because he speaks the language. But does he? And what language are we talking about? Now, we're not really sure when in Britannia is from, but we do know that he's not from the Highlands, he's not from modern-day Scotland. So he was probably from modern-day England, either from Midlands, South or North, we don't really know. So would his language be intelligible from people up north? Well, in this case, it would make sense because at that time in the British Isles, people spoke Common Brittonic, and Common Brittonic will divide into Gaelic in Scotland and other languages around the 6th century. So up to this date, yes, Common Brittonic, probably there would have been regional variations, but they could have understood each other. War chariot, but did the British actually use war chariots in the times of the Romans? Well, we do have to cite Cicero in this case from Ad Familiares, where he says, "I hear that there is no gold or silver in Britain. If this is so, I advise you to get a war chariot and hasten back to us as soon as possible." So war chariots were present. As a matter of fact, we have the first Roman expedition in Britain by Julius Caesar in 55 BC, which was done to suppress the reinforcement being given to native tribes in Gaul. We hear in chariots fighting, the Britons begin by driving all over the field, hurling javelins, and generally the terror inspired by the horses and the noises of the wheels are sufficient to throw their opponents' ranks into disorder. Then, after making their way between the squadrons of their own cavalry, they jump down from the chariots and engage on foot. In the meantime, their charioteers retire a short distance from the battle and place the chariots in such a position that their masters, if hurt pressed by numbers, have an easy means of retreat to their own lines. Thus they combine the mobility of cavalry with the staying power of infantry. So the Britons did use chariots, and they were indeed a problem for the Romans. Not something that the Romans did not manage to overcome, of course, as southern Britannia did become a Roman province, but they were a problem for the Romans. At this time, though, the Romans should have known about it, because again, we have Caesar mentioning the chariots in 55 BC, so it's quite strange that they weren't prepared for it. Okay, well, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember, thumbs up. You're allowed to do it. You are historically accurate. And remember to subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your time. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Valete!